it's not stopping. It will stop when it wants to stop. So I hope that the white noise it's not as harsh for you. I can't find my earphone, so I can hear through the mic. Now let's talk about today's case. I read about this case in a book. I think Robert Miller is the author's name. And I thought it would be interesting to share part of his intro in this case because today's case, like many other older cases, was almost destroyed the evidence and everything that they had because it was an older case with not much to go with. But I'll explain a little bit as we go. Now, we all know that TV shows try to glamorize a lot of things related to true crime. We tend to believe that crime scene investigators are this overqualified college graduate that, are wearing expensive suits and geniuses behind a police salary. But really, I should say, in reality, oftentimes this is not what happens in real life. And I feel like it's portrayed a lot. Like, I've watched different Netflix documentaries that, if you've been following my channel, I am not too I don't know, I don't think they are a good source for true crime. When they make a documentary, they typically make it in a way that fits their narrative and not really leaving the conclusions up to you. If it is a cold case, they typically point you to one person or to a family or somebody without saying, we think this is the killer, yet you're left with that. And in some of those documentaries, you can see old pros, to call them something, that are sometimes retired detectives, FBI, national security. They're very they're retired, but they are often brought to this cold cases on TV, and they give them a box of evidence, and they miraculously solved the cases. But in reality, these cases are often overlooked by a lot of people, and in the end, DNA or advances in technology are the ones that really kind of steal the show. We are learning, I am anyways, about all these cases from the 60s and the 70s, that the criminals like the Golden, I want to call him the Golden Gate, the Golden State. You know who I mean. I am drawing a blank. But a lot of serious criminals are being brought to justice today because of the tiniest scrap of, biological material that was left at the scene, even if it was decades ago. Today we can process it and extract some kind of DNA trace and do an extensive search to find somebody with familial DNA. Now, why do we still have cold cases, right? Well, the answer comes down to mainly two things. Most of the time, the first is that they didn't collect evidence from the crime scene. Maybe the crime scene was contaminated, or in other cases, the evidence had been destroyed. And the second reason is money. It is very sad for me to know that DNA tests are so expensive that for some of the smaller police departments, it's really out of the question. Keeping trained and professional detectives focused on cold cases, it's also something that most small police departments don't have a budget for. But at this point, hard choices have to be made, and they come down to investigating more recent cases. And often, the only way that a small department gets to revisit cold cases is through a grant from the National Institute of Justice. In the year 2012, the Long Beach Police Department got that grant. And one of the cases that they flagged for review was today's case, the 1972 murder of Helen Sullivan. The grant, in fact, had arrived just in time because they were going through serious budget problems, and they were starting to clear out old cases, files, and destroying old evidence that they'd never have a budget to investigate. The clear out of these cases had left them with nearly 900 cold cases still on file. Cases files up to the 60s had already been pulled and evidence was thrown away. But the 70s were still intact, so that helped us in this case with the Sullivan murder, which was a particularly brutal one. And the investigators really wanted to solve January 21st, 1972. At the time, Helen was 54 years old and she had 3 adult children. She was a hard-working entrepreneur who had started her business by selling makeup and jewelry, and later on she became an agent for Nutrilite and Amway. Now, she was always on the top of the sales chart. She was so successful that the profits from her business financed the purchase of a second property. The Sullivans lived in a small 2-bedroom home in North Long Beach. But the kids had already moved out and they didn't feel the need to get anything bigger. But when the next door property was up for sale, Helen put a bid and bought it, and she bought it outright. In the beginning, her mother lived in the house, but Helen later used it as a base for her business. She would work there early on a Friday morning when her killer found her. Helen's husband, Edward, would arrive home from his shift at the Shell refinery in Wilmington to find her office light still on. Now, when he went to check on her and really walked in, he was, for lack of a better word, traumatized. She'd been savagely beaten and stabbed to death. Later on, he learned that she was also raped. Now, this was not an easy job for the police because the killer left little evidence at the scene. The biggest thing they had was a partial fingerprint. But there was also bodily fluids. But at the time, that wasn't something used to solve cases. Back in the day, all that the police could hope for was a blood type match, which might eliminate a suspect or flag another one for investigation. But they didn't have anybody in custody or suspects. Now, to make things harder for the Long Beach detectives, at the time there was an ongoing construction of the Artesia Freeway. This road would cut directly through North Long Beach, and houses that were in its path had been bought by the dozen. So in January of 1972, many of these houses were emptied and boarded up, just waiting for demolition. So that attracted a lot of opportunistic criminals and homeless people to the area. And the crime rate was going up significantly. They had shootouts, Sullivan's killer was still free. Police was not even sure that he was free. I mean, they figured he was a criminal, so maybe he'd already been arrested by law enforcement for something else. At least that's what they tried to tell the Sullivan family. They tried to make them feel better by suggesting that he was probably dead or in jail. This was a cold case for a really long time. And at the time, and as time passed, even Ed died, never knowing what really happened to his wife. Then Helen's oldest daughter, Eleanor, died too. But 40 years later, there was hope. There were 2 surviving children of Helen's. And in January of the year 2012, they got a call from Mike Dugan, which is a retired detective that was assigned to the Long Beach Police Department cold case unit. They told her children that their mother's case was being reopened and that they had biological material from the original crime scene and they were sending it for processing. They were hopeful that there would be a match in the system. And they were lucky because the DNA profile had been matched to a man, Emmanuel Miller, an ex-con with a criminal record. He was known for attacks on women, and he was on parole from his latest prison thing just a day before Helen's murder. Now this guy, Miller, did not include not even one arrest in Long Beach. So they assumed that he was the one of those people that was attracted to the area because of this empty homes. He had plenty of places to hide, and they believe that he set up a base camp where he kept an eye out for the people that were still living in the area. And that is how they believe that he stumbled upon Helen, sitting behind her desk all alone in an empty house in the middle of the night. "40 years on the Long Beach Police Department had just solved the coldest of cold cases on its books. Unfortunately, there would be no takedown. Emmanuel Miller was dead and had been dead for the past 22 years. He died in the year 1990 at the age of 54 while serving another jail term. surviving daughters the news that their mother's killer had finally been identified came as a relief. They got some kind of closure, and even relieved to know that he'd been dead for quite some time and in jail for most of his life. The good part about this case, if there is a good part in a horrible murder, is the fact that they didn't have to go through the court process. The family wouldn't have to face this guy, relive painful memories, and in this case, he wasn't smart enough to stay away from trouble. So it's not really like he got away with it. He was in prison anyway. He died there. So Helen's family felt some way or some kind of justice. It is incredible to really get to that conclusion, in my opinion. I feel like humans, we tend to try to rationalize things that fit our narrative or our life experience or whatever it is. But I thought, there must be something out there that explains why this, if they fought the system, if the girl, if the children, Helen's now adult children, did something against the department or something because of not doing this earlier. But to be honest, I think in the end, I learned that it always comes down to money. And it is so sad to learn that not even the police have these resources available to them. They simply don't. And I feel like there's a lot of criminals getting away with a lot of things just because there's not a budget or a good budget for all police departments that need the budget for investigation, for detectives. I've been learning so much about our local police department. I mean, they're underpaid, they are overworked, and they're trying their best. But if you don't have the manpower, and if you don't have money, then you got resources. And I'm gonna tell you a very recent thing that happened, because I don't want to give you the impression that this is by any means political, but it's actually more about finding a middle ground, and finding a way to keep the order and protection for people than anything political. You couldn't pay me enough to talk about political beliefs or support or anything like that, and I'll share this story with you because it's for a small portion of you who really support my channel and I feel connected to. But a month ago, I was taking my youngest kid, who is a freshman, well, now a sophomore, in high school, and he was, they were having a basketball game in this other school that it's about, I'd say, 45 minutes from us. So we were running late because he forgot something, so he didn't ride the bus with the boys to the game. So he got home, we got in the truck, and we left. As I was driving in this windy road, you have to understand that to get to where we live, there are a couple of mountain passes that you have to go through, and it's supposed to be between 30 miles per hour to 45. I mean, it varies, but you have a lot of twists and turns and cliffs and water and waterfalls, and it is very easy to lose control of your vehicle if you're not paying attention to the road. So we were driving, and when something catches the corner of your eye, and I was focusing on getting to the high school, but with my left eye I caught a glimpse of a car that was on the side, and that side of the road is full of trees, and there's a cliff, and there's a body of water that goes through there. So a stream and part of the river. And so anyways, I looked at my son and I said, "Did you see a car back there, or am I going crazy?" And he said, "I thought I did, but I wasn't paying attention." And I said, "I think that I think I saw airbags deployed." So anyways, this was in a particularly dangerous area because it's a blind curve that I just passed. So there was no way that I could stop there and go back and check, and I couldn't back up because I was completely blind in that area. I couldn't see if there was a car coming behind me. And again, as I said, it is an incredibly beautiful road, but very, very dangerous. So my son said, "Mom, I'll go check it out. If there's somebody else, if there's somebody inside the car, I'll flag you." So anyways, I go back. I keep driving forward until I find a little straight area of the road. So, if somebody was coming after the curve, they'd see me and avoid the truck. There's no area where I can park there. I can't go outside the road because there's a mountain on my right side and there's a cliff on my left side, but I had to stop. There was something that was bugging me, and so my son immediately starts flagging me. My daughter was with us too, and she got down with him, and my son started to go crazy with his hands, and my daughter ran to the truck and said, "There's a man in there." So I go to the truck, and I'm looking profusely from his head. Like, I'm telling you, no joke, it was bleeding bad. And I didn't want to leave him alone, but I knew that I had to go get help. So I opened the door. I managed to get down to the car. I opened the door. I looked at him and it said, "You know, my name is Lenny, and help is coming. You just hang on tight, okay? Don't move, don't try." But the guy had a horrible concussion, so he wanted to say something, and that's typical when you have a terrible concussion. You're just confused, and he was trying to tell me something. At that point, I asked my kids to flag somebody down, and there was this plumber guy who was, poor guy, I mean, he was such an awesome guy. My daughter flagged him. I was gonna go call 911, so he stayed with the guy so he wouldn't have to be alone. And, you know, he could keep talking to the guy and try to keep him awake. And so I get in the truck, do a horrible U-turn that probably took me about 5 or 6 different back and forth to go in this tiny road with a big ass truck. And I turn, and then there's another truck coming, and he looks at me and says, "I already called 911. I kind of saw the whole thing happen. He didn't make the turn. So I try to find another parking space that it's not a parking space. I've tried to park somewhere safely, even though it's not safe to park on the road. So I get down and I go back to the guy, and the guy was repeating something, and I thought, I'll check the back of the car. Maybe there's, a dog or somebody. I don't know. I checked everything. And then my son told me, "I saw this car parked at this spot by the house." And so I decided to go back to that spot and talk to the lady there and see if if she was talking to him or if he was just randomly parked there. So the plumber guy stayed there. At this point, my fire chief was pulling in, and he was confused because he was like, what are you doing here? How did you get here so fast? And I'm like, I didn't hear it in the radio. I was here. So I blabber something to the guy, and I talked to a couple of people to see if somebody knew who this guy was. Went back to where he was parked. Nothing. And we came back, and the kids were like, there, and my kids are 15 and 17, so they're not babies. Apparently they're doing something on the road. I'm sorry, there's gonna be some background noise. So anyways, I tell them, you know what, let's not do this. Let's not do it, because I didn't want them to see as they were gonna have to cut the guy out of the car because his legs were stuck inside the car, and he hit a couple of trees. It's like having an accident with a cement wall. resources in our police department, and I'm meaning money. We do have officers, a handful of them, that I'm sure would love to invest their time doing that. At least to let the family of this guy know, hey, you know, he's in the hospital alone and dying. But the car was registered under somebody else's name. He had no ID. He had no wallet. He had the only thing they could find, it was a membership card for something with somebody else's picture on it. Which, if I was the detective, I'd be on it. I'd be calling this place and be like, hey, can you tell me? I don't know what kind of membership, but let's say Sam's Club or Costco or whatever. Calling and say, hey, I have this name, I have this picture, there's an accident, this is the only thing that was inside the car. I need to know who this guy is, a name, a full name, and that way they can look it up, know who this person is, and maybe give him a call and say, do you know this guy? And that way kind of try to go from there, but there's no money and there's no resources. And even as a volunteer firefighter, I don't have the clearance to help in that matter. It breaks my heart because he was, I don't want to say high, but he had some kind of drugs in his system. To be honest, when I opened the door, I could smell marijuana. But marijuana is legal in the state of Oregon. However, it's not legal to drive under the influence of marijuana. It's considered the same thing as alcohol. You can do it for fun, but you cannot drive while you're on it. So I'm not excusing the guy for being, for smoking or something. I'm not. All I'm saying is that I've heard the things here and there from people, and they're like, oh, he was probably not a good guy. Like, we put labels on people because the guy was high and he had no ID. Now, me, Letty, I am telling you this because most of the time I forget my purse at home. Now, no joking, I just told you I left my pager and my radio on top of the counter along with my purse. And although the vehicle I was driving, it is registered to my name, and it would have been easier to know who I am and where I live and who to contact. This guy didn't, but maybe he was borrowing the car. But now some people came up with the thing that, oh, he probably stole that car and that's why he was driving it, and stuff like that I'm like, how do you know? Was this system for missing people, like in our town. I don't know how much we know about other jurisdictions, and it all comes down to money. And when I read the story and knowing what I know about our local resources for law enforcement, I am like going back to my childhood, I guess, and thinking, shouldn't this be free? Shouldn't DNA be, shouldn't this big DNA companies have an arrangement with the police and say, hey, if you consider that it matters, if you have a criteria where you can say, okay, if it matches, I don't know how many things, or if it goes through this series of things, it would qualify to go send it, because sometimes that's the only thing they have, I don't know, find a way, a system to qualify these cases to be sent for DNA. For goodness sake, why are we charging police departments who are trying to do their job? I mean, if this is not the biggest injustice ever, I don't know what it is. I don't know. My fire chief keeps saying, being a volunteer firefighter, you just have to learn how to turn off your emotions. You just have to get the job done and not think about you're helping people. You're doing a job and you just have to. But at the same time, he is ex-military, so, but at the same time, he's like, it's nice to have somebody who cares, I think after being in the military for so long, you're trained to turn off your emotions, so he was used to a lot of that, and I am all kinds of emotional, and I'm all invested, and I'm all about not leaving people alone, working in teams, and if somebody is going to die, I don't want them to die alone, even though it's gonna be heartbreaking for me, and it's going to be a horrible thing that I'm gonna have to overcome with my anxiety and everything. I would never leave somebody alone who's going to die, or like that guy, if nobody would have showed up, and if there wasn't the amazing team of volunteers that without being paid this, they spent their entire afternoon there for this guy. I would have stayed with him until the 911 people came, got him out of the car, and took him to the emergency room. Because my heart would not let me leave, but in this case, there were other people, and I could spare my kids to go through something that I know it's traumatizing. So I watched this guy almost die, and I tried to help, but I felt helpless. In a way, it kind of made me think about getting certifications. But my selfish self is thinking that if I do that, everything's gonna fall on my shoulders, like it is falling on the chief shoulders right now. And I am not scared of the work that I'm gonna have to put in, but I'm scared of what that would mean for my mental health. So I'm not gonna jump to conclusions, and I'm is so thankful for our chief, because our chief is the one that goes and writes a report when somebody dies of old age, you know. He's there when somebody cuts their leg with a chainsaw, or when they have a horse accident, and everyone can count on him even though he doesn't get paid a penny for his services. So in the end, this case really stirred things up in my heart. And that's why I wanted to make sure to let you know that this is not political. I would never try to get there again. You can't pay me enough to share that, but I will always share what's in my heart and what I think needs to change. And I think there are law enforcement that need resources to solve these cases. I'm not talking about guns, I'm not talking about other things, I'm not talking about, injustices that happen inside our police department and big cases that everyone knows about. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how can we make their lives easier when they have to investigate something and bring somebody to justice. How can we do that? I think at this point, the answer is money. And I am so proud of the community that I live in. I'll do a story time. Something happened recently with in our community, and everyone, and I'm telling you, everyone. I mean, we had a town meeting that it kind of happened out of nowhere. We had a fire practice, but instead of fire practice, the entire neighborhood showed up to review security footage for something that happened to my son. And I mean, there were people getting on their trucks and going to other people's houses to ask about what was going on. I mean, I felt so incredibly bugged up by my community that, in a way, it showed me that it's us, we have the people. We need to look out for each other. And when things come down to not having enough budget and not having enough money, it's amazing what you can do when you're part of a community that cares about each and every one of us and are willing to volunteer and are willing to give up their time to help you when you need help. So, such a terrible thing that had to happen. A couple of things that had to happen. One of them being this accident to open my eyes and see, well, you're a lucky son of your mother for being put in a place like the one that you live right now. I'll do a story time about the other thing here for you guys, but it was very humbling. And this accident, this story really opened my eyes to things that I didn't want to see. Please, I know that it's only a few of you here on Patreon, but I'd love to know what you think about today's case in the comments down below. You can comment in every single Patreon video. Some people send me messages. You can send me a message.